Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to 1812 Channel. Today I have a short review for you of The Astonishing General, The Life and Legacy of Sir Isaac Brock by Wesley B. Turner. Wonder what it's about. I think the title says it all. Now, a friend of mine recommended The Astonishing General as a newer, if not the best, biography of Sir Isaac Brock, commander of British forces at both Detroit and Queenston Heights, and a national hero in Canada. The author, Wesley B. Turner, had been a high school teacher and was a professor at Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario, when I was a student there from 1975 to 1979. But honestly, I have no memory of him. I do have rather vivid memories of another history professor, D.J. Goodspeed, but that's a story for another time. Now, in his preface, Turner explains his use of the word astonishing in the title. Quote, "With the approaching bicentenary of the War of 1812, this book was written in 2011, there is growing interest in all aspects of that war, its participants and victims, and its legacies. One of the most enduring legacies on both the United States and Canadian side was the creation of heroes and heroines. The earliest of these heroic individuals was Major General Isaac Brock, who, in some ways, was the most unlikely of heroes. For one thing, he was admired by his American foes almost as much as by his own people. Even more striking is how a British general, whose military role in that 2.5-year war lasted less than 5 months, became the best-known hero and one revered far and wide. I find this outcome to be astonishing, and approach the subject from that point of view. This concentration on Brock should not diminish anyone's admiration of other historic figures. Tecumseh, John Norton, Oliver Hazard Perry, Winifred Scott, and Laura Secord, to mention a few. Compared to them, however, the way Brock acted and what he achieved in so short a time were so unexpected that I believe the appropriate term for them is astonishing." End of quote. Turner's preface outlines what we will read in the upcoming pages. Here are the main points. 1. Brock was born into an upper-class family from the Isle of Guernsey, a family not without its troubles. 2. He had purchased most of his commands up to the rank of lieutenant colonel when he became commander of the 49th Regiment. 3. His previous combat record, one battle, was unimpressive. 4. He then spent 10 years in Canada, performing administrative duties up until the outbreak of the War of 1812. 5. Thus Brock only came to real prominence during the last year of his life, defending a population largely born in the USA against an American invasion. 6. In spite of his upper-class origins, Brock was a man with the common touch, who showed concern for the needs of the troops under his command. 7. He effectively led both regular troops and militia, and cooperated successfully with native warriors such as Tecumseh. 8. He made intelligent use of psychological warfare and used these skills to defeat a much stronger, in terms of troops, a much stronger opponent. 9. As a major general, Brock only participated in 2 battles. In the first, he beat an opponent who may have been suffering a mental collapse, and in the second, he died early in the battle while he was losing. In the rest of the book, Turner chronicles the world into which Brock is born, his youth and family background, his early years in the army, which include being wounded in action, his time in Canada prior to the War of 1812, and his actions at both Detroit and Queenston. Brock's sole combat experience took place in 1799 as part of the wars against Napoleon. Quote, "In 1799, under Sir Ralph Abercrombie, an English force landed on the Dutch shore near the little town of Helder. Advancing southward, they fought against French and Dutch opposition until the beginning of October, when they were ready to assault Bergen. His, Brock's, regiment was in the right column, whose task was to attack Egmont op Zee. In a letter to his brother John, he told how, when the enemy threatened to turn his regiment's flank, he led a charge across the sand dunes that threw his opponents into disorder and forced them to retreat. He made light of a wound he received. I got knocked down soon after the enemy began to retreat, but never quitted the field and returned to my duty in less than half an hour." Officers frequently wore cravats, usually made of silk, around their throats, and in Brock's case, the ball had penetrated a cotton handkerchief and a black silk cravat, but no further. This short, rather confused clash was his only experience of participating in combat before August the 15th, 1812. End of quote. Turner does a credible job of outlining Brock's life, but the book title mentions Brock's legacy as well. In the final chapter, the author asks why we still remember Brock. "I went to a university named for him, after all." Why we still remember Brock when so many others from the War of 1812 have been relegated to the Dust Bowl of history? Here I'm not sure that Turner is successful, but it may be an impossible task. So why do we remember Brock? Allow me to offer a few thoughts, a few of largely my thoughts. 1. Brock died a winner. Turner notes the popular perception that Brock died undefeated. Quote, "It seemed that more than anyone else, Brock saved Upper Canada from conquest and occupation, for he was seen as the victor at Detroit and even at Queenston. Under subsequent commanding generals, the province experienced military defeat, severe losses among the troops and militia, widespread destruction, shortages, and enemy occupation. Generals such as Schaeff, Proctor, Rottenberg, and Drummond could be held responsible for failures, but not Brock. His record was perceived as unblemished." End of quote. 2. Brock died young, in his prime, and there is a tendency to attach halos to such people. Just think JFK. That's President John F. Kennedy for you younger listeners. After all, the expression is, "Only the good die young." I guess that's why I'm living to a ripe old age. Point number 3. Brock was an attractive personality. He was a good-looking man who stood well over 6 feet at a time when the average soldier was little more than 5 feet tall. At 43, he is described as portly, but that was considered far more agreeable back then than it is in our modern anorexic age. Brock had a warm and engaging personality, and while he could be a strict disciplinarian, he cared about the men under him and tried to improve their lot. Turner writes of Brock's action on learning that some deserters and mutineers from his regiment, the 49th, had been shot following court-martial. Quote, "When Brock received the news of the executions, he ordered the garrison of Fort George under arms and read them the letter. Then he spoke to the men. 'Since I have had the honor to wear the British uniform, I have never felt grief like this, as it pains me to think that any members of my regiment should have engaged in a conspiracy which has led to their being shot like so many dogs.' His evident concern for his men, while still maintaining discipline, suggests one of his great gifts as a commander. It is likely that the men and officers of the 49th would long remember that emotional scene." End of quote. Point number 4. Brock quickly became a folk hero and the subject of a number of folk tales. Now, I used to be involved in storytelling, and I was always disappointed at the lack of Canadian folk tales. The United States seems to be more of a nation of storytellers than Canada. I mean, look at all the tall tale heroes the U.S. has. And what does Canada have? Big Joe Mufferlaw? I mean, Paul Bunyan may have his roots in Quebec, but he is now very much an American hero. But reading Turner's biography, some of the anecdotes about Brock sounded a lot like hero folk tales to me. For example, Turner relates the story of Brock's confrontation with another officer, a crack shot who challenges him to a duel. Quote, "Being tall, Brock knew that he would present an easy target at the usual distance apart of 12 paces. As they prepared for the duel, he demanded that they meet on equal terms. His answer was to produce a handkerchief and insist they fire across it at each other. Not surprisingly, his antagonist declined, and soon after left the regiment. Whether or not this actually happened, it suggests that from an early age, Brock had acute insight into what others, particularly opponents, were thinking and how they might respond to determined action. He was to apply this trait very effectively in 1812, both before and after the war broke out. I.e., think of the Battle of Detroit. Another yarn features Brock wisely settling a dispute between two groups of villagers over the naming of their community. In the end, they actually decide to name it after Brock, as in Brockville, Ontario. You know you've really made it when you become a folk hero. And lastly, and this is my opinion, not an idea presented by Turner in his biography, Brock became the personification of the superiority of British governance and institutions. After all, look how easily he and the British regulars and the loyal Canadian militia defeated the Yankee rabble. I believe one of the central figures behind the elevation of Isaac Brock to Canadian hero was the Reverend John Strawn, a leading member of what became known as the Family Compact. Interestingly, Turner notes that Brock was instrumental in arranging for Strawn's appointment as the officiating minister of the Church of England at York. It is my belief that Strawn would be instrumental in the lionizing of Brock. Hey, what goes around comes around. Some of the most interesting parts of the Astonishing General are the appendices at the end? They are A. Timeline of Brock's life. B. Brock's speeches to the legislature. C. Proclamations by Hollenbrock. D. Biography of significant individuals. And E. Inventory of Brock's estate and purchases. In case you're wondering, the sales from Isaac Brock's estate brought in some £843, the largest buyer being Major General Roger Schaeff. These details seem almost ironic, considering the money problems Brock experienced and which are documented in the book. The Astonishing General concludes with extensive notes and bibliography. My rating? 4.25 out of 5. While Brock's place in the Canadian psyche may not be wholly explained, and no doubt it may be an impossible task, the details of his life and military career certainly are. If you're interested in Sir Isaac Brock, I suggest you begin your search here. Have a suggestion for a War of 1812 book for us to read? Then please share it in the comments below. Our September book, will be The War of 1812 in the Age of Napoleon by Jeremy Black. Please drop a like if you enjoyed the video, and please consider subscribing to our channel, where we chronicle and discuss the events of the War of 1812. My current goal is 100 subscribers. If my voice can make it that far. 100 subscribers. Won't you help me achieve it? When the barrage lifts, cheers. The music used in today's video is The Descent by that patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod.